There is a city at the bottom of the ocean, not a myth, not a legend, a real city with streets, buildings, and walls, sitting in complete darkness under 40 meters of water off the coast of India. It was discovered by accident in 2001 when marine archaeologists were searching for something else entirely. What they found stopped the entire scientific community cold, because the city should not exist. The structures date back at least 9,500 years. That would make this city thousands of years older than the oldest civilization we have ever officially recognized. Older than Egypt, older than Mesopotamia, older than anything in our accepted timeline of human history. And here is the part that nobody talks about. This is not the only one. There are submerged structures off the coast of Japan that mainstream archaeology still cannot explain. There are underwater ruins near Cuba that sonar equipment detected in 2001 and that have never been fully investigated. Something is wrong with the timeline, and the deeper researchers look, the stranger the picture becomes. But before we go underwater, we need to understand something most people were never taught, because without this context, none of what follows will make sense. When your history teacher talked about the beginning of civilization, they probably started around 3500 BC. Mesopotamia, the first cities, the first writing, the dawn of organized human society. That date is not when civilization began. That is when the ice melted. Here is what actually happened. Between roughly 115,000 years ago and 11,700 years ago, Earth was locked in a full ice age. Massive ice sheets buried North America, Europe, and large parts of Asia, and sea levels were not where they are today. They were 120 meters lower. Let that number settle. 120 meters lower. The continental coastlines of the entire planet looked completely different. Enormous stretches of land that are now underwater were dry, fertile, and habitable. The land bridge connecting Asia to North America was not a narrow strip. It was a subcontinent. The Persian Gulf was not a gulf. It was a river valley. Entire geographies that do not exist today were home to our ancestors for tens of thousands of years. And then, around 11,700 years ago, everything changed. The ice began melting, slowly, relentlessly. Over thousands of years, sea levels rose. The coastlines retreated. The fertile plains and river valleys that humans had built their lives around went underwater, 120 meters underwater. If any civilization had been living on those coastlines, if any cities had been built in those valleys, if any ports had been constructed on those ancient shores, they would now be sitting on the ocean floor, hidden under 12,000 years of sediment and darkness. And that is exactly what researchers are starting to find. The city in the Gulf of Khambhat was discovered by India's National Institute of Ocean Technology during routine pollution surveys. The sonar equipment picked up geometric shapes on the seafloor, symmetrical, organized, unmistakably constructed. When divers investigated, they found walls, streets, and a basic urban layout. Among the ruins were artifacts including a piece of worked wood sent for carbon dating. The result came back at 9,500 years old. 9,500 years. That is 4,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, 5,000 years before Stonehenge. At the time this city was allegedly functioning, the oldest known civilization on Earth according to our official timeline was not yet a concept. Writing would not be invented for another 5,000 years. The scientific community divided immediately. Some argued underwater currents could have moved artifacts and that geometric shapes might have natural explanations. Others pointed out that the regularity of the structures and the concentration of artifacts made natural formation deeply unlikely. The debate has never been fully resolved, and that unresolved debate is part of a much larger pattern that spans the entire planet. In 1987, a Japanese diving instructor named Kahachiro Aratake discovered something off Yonaguni Island that he could not explain. Massive stone terraces, geometric steps cut into rock, right angles, a structure stretching over 150 meters in length. The Yonaguni Monument. Researchers have argued about it for decades. The structure sits 25 meters underwater. Some geologists argue the formations are entirely natural, produced by the way sandstone fractures. Others, including marine geologist Masaki Kimura from the University of the Ryukyus, who spent years diving the site, argue that specific features simply cannot be explained by natural processes. A carved face, drainage channels, holes at regular intervals consistent with construction techniques. If Kimura is right, The monument was built when the site was above water. Based on sea level records, that means at least 10,000 years ago. An organized society capable of cutting stone at scale, operating in the Pacific 10,000 years ago. But here is where the story becomes something else entirely, because scattered across human cultures on every continent on Earth, there are flood myths. Not similar flood myths, not vaguely related flood stories, nearly identical flood myths. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in ancient Mesopotamia roughly 4,000 years ago, describes a catastrophic flood survived by one man who builds a vessel and saves his family. The story is so similar to the biblical Noah narrative that when British Museum scholar George Smith first translated the Gilgamesh flood tablet in 1872, he reportedly ran out of the building into the street. But Gilgamesh and Genesis are just two versions. Ancient Hindu texts describe a flood survived by a figure named Manu warned by a fish. Ancient Greek mythology has Deucalion. Indigenous cultures across North America, South America, Australia, and Polynesia all carry versions of the same essential story. A great water, a warning, survivors, a world destroyed and rebuilt. The standard explanation is that these stories are independent cultural inventions. Floods are common, so flood myths are common. But Dr. Bruce Massey at Los Alamos National Laboratory spent years cross-referencing flood myths from around the world, specifically looking for astronomical details embedded in the narratives. Star positions, unusual solar phenomena, celestial events described at the moment the flood began. What he found was remarkable. Across multiple independent flood traditions from different continents, the astronomical details converged on a specific date. Around 2800 BC, Massey's theory is that a large cosmic impact, possibly a comet striking the ocean, generated a catastrophic mega tsunami that affected populations across multiple regions simultaneously. The survivors encoded the memory of this event into stories that gradually became mythologized across generations. This is a contested view, but the correlations across culturally independent sources are difficult to simply dismiss. And this is where the story goes somewhere most documentaries never follow, because there is a researcher whose work has divided the academic community for 30 years, Graham Hancock. He has spent 3 decades diving submerged sites, examining geological records, and arguing that human civilization is significantly older than our official timeline accepts. His critics, and there are many serious ones in mainstream archaeology, argue his interpretations are selective and his conclusions overreach the evidence. Some of those criticisms are fair, but here's what is also true. Several predictions Hancock made about submerged sites have since been confirmed by legitimate archaeological investigation. His core argument that we should be searching underwater for evidence of pre-glacial civilization is no longer fringe. It is now an active area of serious academic research. Dr. Glenn Milne, a geophysicist at the University of Durham, has produced detailed maps of Earth's coastlines at various points during the last ice age. The areas of land lost to rising sea levels are vast, and Milne has said publicly that it is entirely reasonable to expect archaeologically significant sites in those submerged zones. The underwater archaeology of Doggerland, the landmass that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, has already produced real findings: Mesolithic tools, animal bones, evidence of human habitation from a time when the North Sea simply did not exist. We are finding traces. We are barely beginning to look. And here is what the actual evidence currently tells us. Modern humans have been cognitively and anatomically capable of complex civilization for at least 70,000 years. For most of that time, sea levels were lower. The most habitable, resource-rich areas of the ancient world were coastal and low-lying, exactly the areas now underwater. We have been searching for the origins of civilization in the places that survived. We have not been looking in the places that were lost, and the places that were lost are enormous. The site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was discovered in 1994, a massive, sophisticated ritual complex built 11,500 years ago by people who, according to the theory of that era, should not have been capable of organized monumental construction. Its discovery fundamentally shifted the academic consensus on when complex human society began. And here is the detail that almost never gets mentioned. The site was deliberately buried. Someone thousands of years ago intentionally covered the entire complex with earth, carefully carefully, deliberately, as if preserving it, as if protecting it from something coming. Göbekli Tepe sits on a hilltop well above ancient sea level. It survived. Everything built at sea level did not. So here's the question. The history we were taught begins 5,000 years ago, but modern humans have existed for at least 70,000 years. That is 65,000 years of human experience, intelligence, and ingenuity that our official history barely accounts for. Where did all of that time go? What were we doing? And if the answer is somewhere underwater, what does it change about everything we think we know about human potential? About how long it actually takes to build a civilization? About whether everything we have achieved in the last 5,000 years has been done before? The ocean covers 71% of this planet. We have mapped less than 25% of the seafloor in any meaningful detail. The most important chapters of human history may not be buried in desert sands or hidden in jungle temples. They may be exactly where the ice left them, in the dark, underwater, waiting. What do you think is down there? And do you believe the history we were taught is incomplete? Leave your answer below, because I think this is the most important unanswered question in all of human history, and I genuinely want to know what you think.